Hello and welcome to this edition of 10 Minutes On. I'm Guy Burton, the creator and host of this podcast, where each week I take a news story and examine it in more depth. Rather than offering a journalistic recap, I draw on my background as an academic researcher to explore the wider context of the story and provide some broader analysis. New episodes come out every Tuesday morning, so if you find this useful or irritating in a productive way, do like, share, subscribe, and make sure you don't miss future episodes. This week's episode has been prompted by events over the last week, specifically the controversy surrounding Grok, the AI assistant built into X, and its use to generate non-consensual sexualized images of women and children. This episode didn't happen in a vacuum. I've covered Musk and X before on this podcast. In the first episode of 2025, I looked at Musk's widely inaccurate and inflammatory comments about grooming gangs in the UK, when he accused Keir Starmer of failing to prosecute cases that predated his time in office, and called for safeguarding Minister Jess Phillips to be jailed. That moment mattered because it illustrated how easily misinformation travels when it is amplified by power and confidence rather than evidence. In that episode, I asked why we grant so much attention to figures whose certainty so clearly exceeds their understanding. I drew on Anthony Seldon's work on prime ministers, as well as academic research on the disconnect between expertise and power. And before that, in November 2024, I did an episode on the rise of Blue Sky and what some had called the Great Blue Migration, when many users, including myself, finally accepted that whatever Twitter once was, X had become something else entirely. That episode explored why people stayed on the platform for so long despite its controversies, and what finally made leaving possible. For me, that shift was not easy. I had been a heavy user of Twitter before Musk's takeover. I relied on it to follow developments in my research field and to build a community of fellow scholars. For a time, it worked. My account grew, I felt informed, and I felt connected. But I digress. Today's episode is not just about X, Musk, or Grok, which has been in the headlines this week. It's also about football and what the character of X today means for other communities that continue to use it. In other words, this episode brings together two strands, social media and football, wrapped around one particular story. I'll come back to football shortly, but first some context. So Musk took Twitter over in 2022. Under his ownership, Twitter, which then became X, has been transformed into a platform used by journalists, academics, and policymakers to track information in real time into something far more ideologically skewed. Algorithmic changes have amplified far-right voices, moderation has been loosened, abuse has flourished, and bots have proliferated. Musk himself has been explicit about his preferences, backing Donald Trump in the 2024 election, and then, at Trump's inauguration, performing what was widely interpreted as a Nazi salute. Since then, he has also played a role in dismantling parts of the American state through the so-called Department of Government Efficiency, including cuts to international aid. In the UK, he has criticised the government, calling for its removal, and lent support to the far-right anti-immigrant activist Stephen Yaxley-Lennon, better known as Tommy Robinson, by appearing at virtual events. Full disclosure, by the way, Musk's salute at Trump's inauguration was the point at which I stopped being anything more than a passive presence on the platform. The character of X has shifted accordingly. It remains one of the world's largest social media platforms, with billions of visitors each month and hundreds of millions of users as of late 2025. But traffic has been declining for at least 2 years. Its user base skews young, yet teenage usage is falling faster than on rival platforms. The gender imbalance is striking, roughly 2 men for every woman, far higher than on other major platforms. And X is no longer a neutral backdrop. It is a space where narratives are shaped, resentments cultivated, and boundaries pushed. Among all major platforms, it is uniquely problematic, and that is the context in which last week's Grok controversy sits. Grok has been used to generate non-consensual sexualized images of women and children. It has allowed users to digitally undress photographs and place individuals into abusive and degrading scenarios. Among those targeted was one of the young women who died recently at the Crans Montana bar in Switzerland. The condemnation was swift, and rightly so. X's response, however, was revealing. Rather than withdrawing the tool or addressing the design choices that enabled the abuse, access to Grok was restricted to paying users. This is the same platform whose owner last year accused British politicians of failing to protect children from grooming gangs and demanding prison sentences for ministers on the basis of false claims. Governments are now openly debating what to do about X. In the UK, there has been discussion about whether official accounts should remain active at all. The Technology Secretary has hinted that the regulator Ofcom could block the platform if it proposed that. Indonesia and Malaysia, meanwhile, have already blocked access to X over Grok's functionality. And yet, by the end of the week, little had changed on the UK side. And that brings me back to football. Football likes to insist that it is apolitical. This claim is repeated so often that it has acquired the status of common sense. But it is nonsense. Football has always been political. The international governing body is FIFA. Its first modern president, João Havelange, built his power from the mid-1970s on by cultivating the global south through financial incentives in exchange for votes, and by expanding the World Cup to include more countries. His successors, Sepp Blatter and Gianni Infantino, refined rather than rejected this model. Today, FIFA runs a range of social impact campaigns, including No Discrimination, No Racism, and Unite for Peace. Even the much ridiculed FIFA Peace Prize, awarded to Donald Trump last month at the 2026 World Cup draw, fits into this ecosystem, as does a recently announced post-conflict recovery fund for regions affected by conflict. And Infantino regularly insists that football is more than a game, that it is a force for unity, peace, and hope. This ambition predates him, of course. Blatter, before his disgrace in 2015, openly nurtured dreams of winning the Nobel Peace Prize for spreading football around the world. At the national level in England, the Football Association runs anti-discrimination initiatives, supports FIFA campaigns, and promotes diversity and inclusion, including efforts to increase South Asian representation. It also has a safeguarding strategy. In its most recent annual report, CEO Mark Bullingham acknowledged that child abuse occurs in football as it does in wider society, and that the FA is constantly seeking to mitigate those risks. And yet, when you look at how racism and safeguarding are addressed in practice, the scope is surprisingly narrow. Reporting mechanisms focus on behavior inside stadiums, on the pitch, or within clubs. What is largely missing is engagement with the wider environment in which racist and abusive attitudes are formed, reinforced, and normalized. And that environment increasingly includes social media. Now, back in September 2025, Tommy Robinson led a large anti-migration march in London, reportedly attracting up to 150,000 people. Media coverage reinforced the idea that Britain is uniformly hostile to migrants, even as YouGov polling last month tells a more complex story. Migration is a major issue, but not a consensus one in Britain. Attitudes are polarized by party, age, and Brexit identity. Understanding of basic concepts like net migration is shallow and uneven, even among those with strong views. Much of the debate rests on systemic misrepresentation of facts. At the same time, police-recorded hate crimes have been rising sharply over the past decade, with racially motivated offences consistently forming the majority. These figures understate the problem, as many incidents go unreported and changes in recording practices explain only part of the increase. So against that backdrop, football's behaviour looks increasingly disingenuous. Liverpool FC's X bio reads, "Stop the hate, report it," yet Liverpool, like every other Premier League club, remains active on the platform. The claim that football does not do politics becomes impossible to sustain when clubs continue to operate on a platform whose design normalizes abuse, misogyny, and racialized hostility. Presence is not neutral. To post is to legitimize. This is especially striking in the Premier League, where more than 70% of players are non-British. These are precisely the people targeted by many of the narratives circulating freely on X. All 20 Premier League clubs continue to post regularly, commanding audiences in the millions. Manchester United alone has nearly 38 million followers, followed by Chelsea, Liverpool, Arsenal, and Manchester City. This continued presence is a choice. I am not arguing for an overnight exit. Clubs have invested years in building audiences, but reducing activity, signalling a shift, or committing to alternative platforms would matter. When your reach is global, symbolism matters. I've already raised this issue with my own club, Aldershot Town. It is small, and its departure would be largely symbolic. But if Premier League clubs, with their extraordinary reach, were to reconsider their position, it would be impossible to ignore. Football cannot credibly claim to be apolitical while continuing to legitimize a platform that undermines the values it claims to defend. And that brings me to a call to action, probably the first time I've made one on this podcast. If you support a Premier League club, consider asking them what their view is on Grok's treatment of women and children, on anti-racism, and on whether their continued presence on X is consistent with those values. If they reject what Grok has enabled and the hostility directed at migrants on the platform, perhaps it is time they began thinking seriously about an exit strategy. I'll leave it there for this week. If this episode resonated with you, please do share it, leave a review, and subscribe. New episodes are out every Tuesday morning. Do also contact me via my own social media, on Blue Sky or LinkedIn, or via my website at guyburton.net to let me know what you think of the podcast itself and what topics I could cover in future weeks. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back again this time next week. Goodbye for now.